Coming up on Jerusalem Dateline, the newly strengthened ties between Saudi Arabia and Iran. What do they mean for Israel, and how does China affect the dynamic in the Middle East? Plus, 5 red heifers. What do they have to do with the rebuilding of Jerusalem's third temple? And an Israeli rabbi, his wife, and a school principal create a safe haven for children living in the shadow of war. Plus, the Jerusalem Marathon brings runners from around the world to the City of Gold. All this and more coming up on this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. On March 15th, Israeli President Isaac Herzog addressed the nation concerning the contentious issue of judicial reform. He called it the People's Plan as a compromise proposal. He said the issue has divided Israelis and warned of a civil war, something he says he will not allow while he's president. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejected the plan and says it only perpetuates the current situation. In the meantime, the Knesset has approved the so-called override clause in its first reading. The clause allows the Knesset to override a decision by the Supreme Court with a 61-seat vote. It requires 2 more readings to become law. Well, China shocked the world when it brokered a normalization agreement between arch-rivals Iran and Saudi Arabia. It's the latest in the battle for influence between Washington and Beijing. Middle East analyst Avi Malamed explains more. Avi Malamed, great to be with you in Jerusalem Dateline. Big news here in the Middle East just a few days ago. Iran, Saudi Arabia signed an agreement brokered by China. What's your reaction to this?
Well, a couple of immediate observations. The first one, we're not looking at a honeymoon. The Saudis and the Iranians are, totally hostile one to the other. There is a lot of animosity and mistrust between the two sides. So we should be very clear about it. It's not that we're going to see a new chapter in the Middle East. As for the role of China, this is the big story because China, as I've been saying for a long period of time, is becoming a very significant player in the region. And actually, that specific achievement of the Chinese diplomacy reflects the growing impact of China in the region on the one hand and the declining hegemony of the West on the other hand.
What does it signal about the United States in particular, about their waning influence here in the region?
Well, it's not a secret that many in the Arab world, and it's very clear, are saying, look, one major reason for the fact that China was the one brokering this deal is because there is a lot of discontent, disappointment, and frustration within Arab states, particularly the Gulf monarchies, and on top of it, Saudi Arabia, with the policy of the United States of America. And by the way, it goes only not back to the time of Biden currently, but also back to the time of President Trump. We have to remember that during the presidency of Trump, Saudi Arabia was directly attacked by the Iranians a couple of times, and also by the Houthis in Yemen, but there was no repercussion, sort of speaking, in that context, that there was no reaction by the United States of America. And then also with the Biden administration, there is a lot of discontent and frustration between the Saudis and the administration. So to a large extent, the fact that China was able to broker that deal and not the United States of America, to a large extent, not exclusively, but to a large extent reflects the fact that there is a lot of frustration and distrust towards the American administration.
So if China has basically come in the door in the Middle East, what do you see in the future? Will they try to expand their influence?
Definitely. They're already expanding the Middle East is enormously significant for China. China has 2 major ultra-strategic interests. One is energy security and the other one is food security. And in both contexts, and particularly energy security, the Middle East is crucial for China. China imports from Saudi Arabia every day 2 million barrels of oil. China imports 40% of its oil from the region, from the Middle East, and particularly from the Gulf area. So China has a lot of interest, and it's deepening its presence in the Middle East, and it's going to expand its presence and, accordingly, its influence in the Middle East.
What does that say for Israel right now, and what impact will it have on Israel?
Well, basically, I think that to a large extent, this is something good for Israel, because China is very much interested in Israel. Because of Israel's location offshore the eastern basin of the Mediterranean, because of Israel's advanced economic, technological, military capacities, and so on, China does not hide its interest to invest in Israel. In fact, the Chinese are massively invested in Israel. So Israel, in that sense, is a very significant component for the Chinese grand vision of one belt, one road. And that, in a way, kind of like play to the hands of Israel. That being said, we have to also to remember that the Chinese hug is a little bit like a bear hug. You have to be careful with that. So Israel is kind of like, doing this very complex dance between China on the one hand, the United States of America on the other hand, because in the end of the day, the United States of America is the biggest strategic partner and ally of Israel in the region. But I'm saying about the Middle East, there is no one single player in the Middle East that allow himself to ignore any message from China. You don't ignore messages from China because it's a massive, big, giant player, and Israel is included within that.
Yeah. One of the initial observations I had was if Saudi Arabia is now aligning itself, signing this agreement with Iran, brokered by China, does this mean that Saudi Arabia won't be joining the Abraham Accords?
No, not necessarily, but I have to be very clear about it. I know that when we saw the Abraham Accords, there were many people that said, oh, the next day we are going to see an Israeli-Saudi agreement. And I said constantly it's not going to happen. It will take a long time because there are many obstacles to cross through the way. Saudi Arabia knows exactly what the mullah regime in Tehran is like. The Saudis have no illusions, and they are not going to drop the card that is called Israel, because from the Saudis' perspective, Israel is a very significant, potentially strategic ally. Up until now, there has been an ongoing low-profile dialogue, I would even say pragmatic dialogue, between Israel and Saudi Arabia in different areas. That dialogue will continue. It's not going to stop because Saudi Arabia signed an agreement with the Iranians. And therefore, I think that it will be more or less the same thing that was before the agreement of the Saudis and the Iranians. The dialogue between Israel and Saudi Arabia will continue and will develop. But in its own pace, low profile, there are a couple of things that have to be achieved first before you can move on to the next phase.
Coming up, the arrival of 5 red heifers in Israel last year stirred excitement and dreams of a third temple in Jerusalem. We take a look at where these red heifers are today when we come back. Last September, 5 red heifers arrived in Israel amid great anticipation because some Jews and Gentiles believe it's a key element leading to the building of the third Jewish temple. Here's an update on where these biblical animals are today. The 5 red heifers are now in a secure, undisclosed location in Israel. Plans include moving them sometime soon to a visitor's center in Shiloh, where the tabernacle of the Lord once stood for nearly 400 years. The book of Numbers explains that ashes of the red heifer are used to purify priests for their service in the temple.
Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, This is the ordinance of the law which the Lord has commanded, saying, Speak to the children of Israel that they bring you a red heifer without blemish, in which there is no defect, and on which a yoke has never come. You shall give it to Eleazar the priest, that he may take it outside the camp, and it shall be slaughtered before him. Its offal shall be burned, for the water of purification. It is for purifying from sin.
These red heifers are now between 1.5 to 2 years old. To replicate the ceremony mentioned in the Bible, they need to be at least 3 years old. And within that time span, they cannot have a blemish or anything that would disqualify them for the ceremony, even one white or black hair. According to those working on the project, the ceremony of the red heifer needs to be performed on the Mount of Olives and in a place that would have looked directly into where the temple stood. The land I'm standing on, bought 12 years ago, fits both of those standards.
It had to be exactly at the front, a place that the priest that made this ceremony can see the Holy of the Holy Place.
Rabbi Yitzhak Mamo owns the land here on the Mount of Olives.
And we hope that in a year and a half from today, we can make here in this area the ceremony of the red heifer. That actually will be the first step to the temple.
Mamo says the ceremony needs priests who have not been defiled by touching anything dead.
The Temple Institute actually have 9 pure priests They didn't born in hospital, okay, they born at home. Because they are priests, so anyway, they don't go to any cemetery. And the parents keep them in a situation that they will not get to any cemetery, not going to any problematic place, and they are pure, and they are waiting. So we have the priest, we have the red heifer, we have the land, and we have everything ready. We just need to wait another 1.5 years.
So we believe that it's very likely that the ceremony would happen somewhere in the area of Passover 2024 out to possibility of Shavuot 2024. Somewhere in that timeline, the cows would be old enough and it would be the proper timeline for that ceremony.
Byron Stinson of B'nai Israel helped find the red heifers in the U.S. He says these would be the first in 2,000 years and that the process toward a third Jewish temple began when the Jewish people started their return to the Promised Land from the four corners of the world, culminating with Israel becoming a nation.
And then in 1948, in one day, they were reborn as a nation, and nobody said that could happen. And then you move forward, and Israel continues to be this strong nation, and all of these prophecies start fulfilling. There's so many now have been fulfilled. It's just incredible, the evidence of what God is doing with Jerusalem as the center of that. And the temple is the center of Jerusalem. And so how can it happen and how will it happen? I don't think anyone really knows for sure.
Stinson believes the temple is meant to be a house of prayer for all nations.
You know, in the Bible, it says when Solomon built the first temple, he said, this is a house of worship for all nations. That's what the temple is. And I think a lot of people think it's just a Jewish temple, but that's not true. It's for all the nations of the earth.
Stinson says they plan to invite everyone to the red heifer ceremony that may take place in Passover 2024.
Everything is in place now with the red heifers. As long as they stay pure, one of them stays pure, then we have everything in place, including the priest.
Mamo says according to the Jewish sage Maimonides, there were 9 red heifers from Moses to the Second Temple.
It's not his way to write, but suddenly he said the tent will make the Messiah. We know that the Messiah will make the tent. Maybe we have the privilege to be one of these people that help the Messiah to do it. So we're waiting.
Up next, rescuing orphans in Ukraine. The incredible story of how a rabbi saved the lives of hundreds of children. When war started in Ukraine, one rabbi acted quickly to help his community escape the country. Part of his plan including sending 300 orphans and others from Odessa to Germany. A year later, CBN News Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl met the rabbi and his wife in Odessa, back where it all began.
Within days of the beginning of the war, Rabbi Avraham Wolf and his wife Chaya rented multiple hotel rooms in Berlin to get the orphans to safety.
We started a refugee camp in Berlin with all of our orphans. We took a hotel in the part of Berlin that used to be a camp of the communist secret police and where Putin played billiards. We rented from there 170 rooms in the hotel. We opened a preschool, school, and a university there.
Back in Odessa, the community now had an empty building with a bomb shelter.
We took out the beds, put in the desks and the chairs. During the war, everybody came here to study together because we have a bomb shelter that we renovated and heated. Now it's possible to stay here for many hours.
Children from the local Jewish community, as well as Jewish families who fled other cities, use the building for school and more.
We have 112 children who study every day from 8 a.m. till 6 p.m. Whoever wants can leave at 4 p.m. Others can stay till 6 p.m. with group activities and homework and whatever the children need. The children get 4 meals a day here. They get free transportation. Everything is free. We receive everyone who wants to study at a Jewish school with great joy.
Nechama Vigler, who runs the school, took CBN News down to the bomb shelter.
There are days when we spend more time in the bomb shelter than in the classrooms upstairs. Unfortunately, during the last year, this is the main entertainment place of our children. Here we study, eat, play, and sometimes we stay here until the late hours of the night, until we're able to release the children to go home.
Vigler says that even though all the children have homes, many live without electricity or heat.
So the school today is more than the place to provide knowledge and to study. This is the place for children to live, to meet people. Here we have a generator, so we have electricity and heating and food, breakfast and lunch. And here the children get strength because most of them come from dark homes without electricity and return to dark homes, which is a shocking and difficult thing.
She says despite conditions, young children have a positive attitude.
The children are amazing people. I can come in the morning feeling down and I receive energy from the children. They always see the good side and always with a smile, especially the younger ones. For the older children, it's more complicated. Their feelings are difficult. Talking to them and hearing what's on their hearts, doubts, fear of the future is really not easy. It's complicated and difficult.
Vigler says the people of Odessa remain strong, even after suffering through a tough winter.
I feel the drop in energy, but the people, all of them, are confident in the victory, not willing to give up, and I feel they're united. This has united the nation in an amazing way.
She says no matter where people live, it's important to care about others.
I think that at the end of the day, each person, regardless of where you live, in the States or Israel, all of us are emissaries. Each one of us can be a light.
Wolf says it will take a miracle for the war to end soon.
Other than a miracle, it's impossible to explain it because the way it looks, it's going to be a long story. But we're believing people. We renovated the synagogue, renovated the orphanages to receive the children, other buildings. We're confident that everything will be well. God will protect us. There will be miracles.
And after a year in Berlin, 120 orphans returned home to Odessa to separate girls' and boys' homes. And the school is continuing. Shortly after their return, they celebrated one boy's birthday together with Purim, marking the Jews' deliverance from an evil plot to destroy them, as told in the book of Esther. And now they seem happy to be home. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Odessa, Ukraine.
Still ahead, racing through biblical history. Runners from across the globe come to Israel for this year's Jerusalem Marathon. Jerusalem is most often known as the Holy City, but on a bright sunny morning, runners from Israel and around the world turned it into a giant sporting venue. Tens of thousands of athletes ran through 3,000 years of biblical history as they took part in Jerusalem's annual marathon. Julie Stahl has the story.
40,000 participants took part in this year's Jerusalem Winter Marathon and other races. That's 10,000 more than have ever joined in the annual event.
It's the 12th marathon, and we are very excited to start the marathon. And you know, it's after the COVID, and it's something very special for us.
Jerusalem Mayor Moshe Leon says the marathon is more than a sporting event.
You might be running 42 kilometers, but you're also running through 3,000 years of history.
Leon and his wife also took part in the 10K. Among the athletes, 2,700 runners from more than 70 countries came up to Jerusalem to take part. Runners from Kenya won both the men's and women's marathon. The races take runners past iconic sites like the Tower of David, the Old City Walls, and Jaffa Gate.
I'm just trying to spread the peace, the love between everybody, regardless about what you believe, regardless about your color, regardless about your religion.
Jerusalem is a special city with the running and without the running. So you're welcome to visit, and especially in the marathon. It's a beautiful city. I just want to start it and finish it, but I'm very, very excited.
There are 6 races, including a marathon, half marathon, 10-kilometer, 5-kilometer, a family race, and a community race.
And I've been running the marathon since it began here, the Jerusalem Marathon. And this is my grandson.
Yeah, Iftachi.
And this is
Say
my
hello.
son.
Hi,
and
hi.
they're continuing the tradition for the next 50 years.
Amen.
because now it's my 70th birthday.
The full marathon is one of the most challenging in the world because the city is very hilly.
I'm hoping to finish without hurting myself, and it's my first marathon, so yeah, it should be good. I'm looking forward.
One couple even ran on their honeymoon.
Just got married on Tuesday. Yes, and we keep running and running and running. That's all we do. Everything's great. It's beautiful to be here.
Jerusalem is already preparing for next year, and registration is open for the marathon that's unique in all the world. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And you can also access CBN content through our CBN News and other CBN apps. And don't forget to sign up for our email blasts so you can continue to receive all of our exciting CBN content. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.